Hey, welcome back to the Oddity Report. Today we're discussing the seminal work that continues to resonate not just in the context of African American history, but in how we think about education, identity, and self-determination. We're talking about Carter G. Woodson's The Miseducation of the Negro. So what makes the Miseducation of the Negro such an important text? Let's start by talking about the man behind the book. Carter G. Woodson, often called the father of Black history, was a pioneering African American historian and educator in the 20th century. He noticed something troubling. Black people were being taught a version of history that distorted their identity, belittled their contributions, and in many cases erased them entirely. Now, Woodson didn't just complain about this, he took action. So in 1926, he established Negro History Week, which would later evolve into Black History Month. But perhaps his most influential work came in 1933 when he published The Miseducation of the Negro, a book that critiques not only the state of African American education, but also the very system that perpetuates it. So why is this book so significant? Let's break it down. The Miseducation of the Negro argues that the education system in America has been designed to uphold the status quo, one where white people are seen as superior and Black people as inferior. Woodson's central thesis is that the education African Americans receive teaches them to undervalue their own culture, history, and intellect. Instead, they're taught to idolize white standards, perspectives, and institutions. Woodson isn't just talking about the formal education system. He's talking about the way education is structured in society, how we consume knowledge, and who gets to define what is valuable. In his words, Black people have been miseducated into thinking they're less than, thinking their culture has little worth. And here's where Woodson's genius comes in. His critique isn't just theoretical. He challenges Black people directly. He says, the real question is, what are we doing about it? Because while the system is designed to miseducate, there is a powerful tool at our disposal, and that is the ability to reclaim and reshape our own education. Now, it's important to think about the historical context. In the early 1900s, the majority of Black people or Americans were living in the South under the harsh realities of segregation and limited educational opportunities. Many Black children were being taught in schools that barely existed, often by teachers who themselves lacked adequate resources or training. The textbooks, full of stereotypes, omissions, and outright lies. Woodson saw this as a systematic attempt to keep African Americans in a subordinate position. His book was a call to action, not just to demand better schools, but to radically transform how African Americans viewed themselves and their place in history. So, what can we take away from this today? The book was written in the 1930s, but its lessons are still painfully relevant. The Miseducation of the Negro urges us to think critically about the education system, especially for Black children, and whether it's designed to uplift them or make them conform to someone else's standards. Absolutely, we see the legacy of this miseducation in today's debates around curriculum, whether it is the teaching of Black history, the erasures of contributions from marginalized communities, or the focus on Eurocentric viewpoints. Woodson's work reminds us that education isn't neutral. It's shaped by power. And one of the most powerful points Woodson makes is about the idea of self-education. He encourages Black people not to wait for the system to change, but to take control of their own intellectual and cultural development. In other words, it is about creating our own narratives, writing our own history, and perhaps most importantly, understanding our own worth. Think about today's world. How often do we see the erasure of Black voices or the unrepresentation of Black history in textbooks? Woodson's call to action is still so needed. The education system might have evolved in some ways, but the core problem remains. We need a system that empowers all students, particularly Black students, to see their value in full. So how do we reclaim our education? Well, Woodson suggests that we start with understanding our own history. And for that, we need to look beyond traditional textbooks and curricula. We have to turn to the voices of Black scholars, thinkers, and activists. We need to invest in our own schools, our own institutions, and most importantly, our own minds. And the work is ongoing. We live in a world where history is still being shaped and misshaped by the powers that be. But as Woodson demonstrated, we can push back, we can reclaim our narratives, and we can demand an education that reflects our full humanity. So in closing, the miseducation of the Negro is more than just a critique of the education system. It's a call to reclaim our history, our identities, and our futures. It challenges us to ask difficult questions, to seek knowledge beyond the classroom, and to take responsibility for our own intellectual growth. Thanks for joining me today as we explore the enduring significance of Carter G. Woodson's The Miseducation of the Negro. If you haven't read the book yet, I highly recommend picking it up. It's as relevant now as it was nearly a century ago. Stay curious, stay informed, and keep questioning. Until next time, I'm Denoda. Peace.